COVID-19 vaccination status, or 2, require a person to receive a COVID-19 vaccination as a condition of employment. Number 2, it also establishes a misdemeanor penalty for violating Section 27-117 in the following way. A person who violates subsection B of this section shall be guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by imprisonment for not more than 6 months, a fine of $750, or both. And last, this establishes a civil penalty. Any person aggrieved by a discriminatory practice prohibited by this section or subsection B of this section may initiate an action in court of competent jurisdiction to recover damages of not less than $500,000 and punitive damages, as well as injunctive or equitable relief from the employer. That is it in a nutshell. Obviously, it covers a lot of pages and goes in a lot of other sections, but I will stand for any questions you may have, and we'll just kind of take it from there.
Any questions? Senator Scott.
And Mr. Chairman, let me see if I understand the bill. And frankly, I've just seen it today and I'm not very familiar with it. So it's the trouble with doing things as we are in the special session. But let me see if I understand the practical effect of it. If I'm a private employer, and let's say for the sake of argument, I'm running a hospital, and I use that because I've heard that our hospital is doing this and there's people who don't like it. Hospital treating very frail people. If they're in the hospital because there's something wrong with them and they're frail, Mr. Chairman. And I'm scared that if there's any exposure to COVID, they may catch a case, and that on top of their other conditions may prove to be fatal. And I would say, just anecdotally, there's evidence that's true, because it was reported in the public press that General Colin Powell had some medical conditions, had been properly vaccinated, caught a breakthrough case, and it was fatal. So I would say that was a credible fear. As I read this bill, are we telling anybody running that hospital that they cannot insist that somebody be vaccinated as a condition of employment, and are forcing them to take the risk of infecting somebody? Because the staff's all together and whatnot, and there's communication among them. I suppose if the billing staff were housed somewhere totally elsewhere, that's another matter. But any of the patient treating people could well encounter some of the very ill and frail. And I can see how a employer in that circumstance would want to take special precautions. And I think the same would apply, quite possibly, Mr. Chairman, to a nursing home and some other healthcare facilities. It seems to me we're putting them in jeopardy with this bill and that with the provision on page 3, lines 12 through 17, that such an employer would be liable to being sued by any employee that they, or potential employee that they excluded, and would then also be liable for being sued for any patient that managed to get infected by their staff. And you're putting your employer in just an impossible situation. What am I missing here, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, Appreciate the question. Yes, yes. The long question, I'll try to answer it best I can. If I don't get at everything you need, please get a follow-up in there. The way I look at this, I think this mirrors what the state of Montana just recently passed as far as prohibiting vaccination by making it a protected class in employment law. So yes, to answer your question, this would prohibit anybody from getting rid of an employee based on their vaccination status regarding COVID-19. To my knowledge, most of the healthcare workers voluntarily have gotten vaccinated. Most of the elderly patients have voluntarily been vaccinated. Most people, if they haven't been vaccinated, have already had the virus, so there's natural immunity there. So there's really no need to get the vaccine or the shot. So we are nearing, in my estimation, herd immunity as far as that goes. If the shot works as advertised, those that have had the shot should be protected. Hope that answers your question. If not, please have a follow-up.
Still see a problem with employers because we have, I hope that your analysis of how close we are to a natural immunity proves to be correct. But the last time I looked in my local paper, they were reporting steadily between 500 and 600 new cases a day. So I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think this is going to drag on at a lower level for quite some time. And I'm worried in general about the practice of putting this kind of legal requirement on employers. We've been a pretty friendly state, Mr. Chairman, for employment matters. This is fundamentally changing that. And particularly in the healthcare area, the provider in my county owns a hospital of about the same size down in Colorado. And I'm afraid if our employment law becomes unfriendly, what will happen is on a number of types of cases that are now treated in my community, they will simply be sent to Colorado because they think they can do it safer down there because the laws aren't as restrictive. And we will lose the ability to treat certain things in my community. And you don't get as good results, Mr. Chairman. I think the evidence is quite clear with treatments that are further away from home and family supports and that sort of thing. And Mr. Chairman, you may drive off some specialists that you need access to at times when our roads are closed and our air evacuation people are not flying. And that is a surprising percentage at the time in the wintertime. So I'm afraid you'll do some damage to not only our ability to treat patients within the community, but to our economics. So I really question, Mr. Chairman. I don't think this is as harmless as you might think. And maybe I'm missing something in all this, but it does seem to me that we're changing ourselves from a business friendly to a business unfriendly state with this particular law.
Chair Biden.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, it's a good conversation. I think if we do nothing, the possibility, the consequences of doing nothing are also not very good. You've got a potential to have a mass exodus in the healthcare field where at a time where we do not need it and cannot afford it. We need our nurses and healthcare providers on the job, not laid off over a vaccine mandate or fired, putting people in an untenable position of choosing their livelihood versus their bodily autonomy, whether or not to follow their conscience as to whether or not that they think this vaccine's right for them in a time where we're in a pandemic. It doesn't make any sense. As far as and also if we don't do anything, who's to say these employers are not going to get sued under the American Disabilities Act? They're not going to get sued under the Civil Rights Act. To think that we're not going to be a business friendly state by making vaccination status a protected class per se, there'll still be lawsuits. This is one way or the other. We didn't ask for this fight. The feds did. This is a response to that to try to protect our employees. I don't want to pit employers versus employees, but we have to do something to protect our people and their fundamental rights. And I believe this is a prudent way to address that.
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Question, what happens to somebody who's unvaccinated and gets the COVID? Am I right in thinking that then they're quarantined for a significant period of time, so we lose them from the health force, workforce either way?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Scott, yes, obviously unvaccinated people can get COVID and vaccinated people can get COVID. It does not prevent you from getting the disease. It may prevent the severity of the disease, but we've seen that. That's why I don't like using the term vaccine, because I think people conflate it with smallpox and polio and other vaccines where you get the vaccine and you are prevented from getting the disease. I prefer to call it a shot, like a flu shot, because it does not prevent you from getting the COVID. The science is not settled on this shot. So yes, to answer your question, unvaccinated people can get the virus and so can vaccinated people. So I don't think that should prevent us from acting.
Mr. Chairman, is it not true that quite a number of the other vaccines, starting with the flu one, are only partial protection as well?
Senator Brightman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Slightly different, I guess, line of questioning here is looking at the requirement. This basically applies to every business in the state of Wyoming. And in my conversations with my constituents, especially those who've been calling me, voicing their support for making sure that, and a lot of them are looking at losing their jobs if they work for a big, say, uranium company in Commerce County, or they work for a healthcare facility that's a large out-of-state conglomerate. They're really concerned, so I appreciate the bill. But every time I get these questions, I also ask them, are you concerned about having maybe an exemption for small businesses? Say if we strike the one there and insert 25, because I just haven't heard that many concerns about small businesses mandating this vaccine. It's largely these large out-of-state corporations who maybe aren't all that in touch with where their people are at here in Wyoming. That's what's causing a lot of the conflict. And I bring that up because you mentioned Montana, and at least one of the lawsuits against the state is from a very small business. And so I just want to make sure that this law is as tight as it can be, make sure we're hitting the problem and nothing but the problem. So I guess my question is, have you had any discussion about having what would in effect be an exemption for small businesses at 25 is the number that sticks to my mind. Just wondering if you had any discussion along those lines. Mr.
Chairman, Senator Boner, that's a good question. I haven't had a chance to talk to the lead sponsor about that specifically, but I would imagine that we could work with some amendments on that.
Further questions? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things I'd like to explore. You mentioned that if we don't pass this bill, there'll be a mass exodus. I think that was your term, of employees in the healthcare fields, which would aggravate the pandemic and our response to it. Kind of what's your basis for that? Saying that it would be a mass exodus. What's mass? 10%, 100%, 1%?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, we've all been flooded with emails and phone calls. We've been hearing from people that were refused to get vaccinated for whatever reasons, religious reasons, philosophical reasons, medical reasons, natural immunity reasons. they're just not going to do it. So they're hanging on long enough to get fired, basically. They're going to make the employer actually fire them for not taking the shot, whereas they've been heroes for the last year and a half during the pandemic without this option of having the vaccine. And now we're turning around and throwing them under the bus, so to speak. So to me, any employee in the healthcare field, for instance, who is let go because of this in the middle of a pandemic is a problem. And that's a terrible consequence of policy from policymakers when we need every single hand on deck. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Follow up, Senator Case.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Well, I'm trying to get at the magnitude of the problem we're trying to solve. Are we talking about one employee out of every 1,000? Are we talking about one employee out of every 100? Or one employee out of every 2? I too have gotten those emails and I understand what you're talking about. But, you know, statewide, it's probably quite a few emails, but it doesn't strike me as being a huge number in the universe of total employees. I appreciate your comments on that. And then if I just might follow up, so employers, they probably have, you know, we're an at-will state. For most parts, that carries a lot of weight in Wyoming, always has. And employers might have good reasons for requiring people to be vaccinated. I'm not sure that I would concur with your assessment that when we have a pandemic, we need all hands on deck. Not if the hands on the deck are actually spreading the pandemic. I'm not sure we need that. So I'd appreciate elaboration on both those points. And I do have one more follow-up after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Case. I guess it depends on what premise you're coming at. If you think that this vaccine prevents the spread of the virus, like it was sold at the beginning, or if it doesn't. So that's one question I guess I have for you. The total number, I don't have that number in front of me. Obviously, nobody can know that number. It comes down to where you come down philosophically on civil rights and people's bodily autonomy and their ability to make medical decisions on their own without being coerced into a vaccine that they may not want. So in my estimation, one person, if their rights were violated, that's cause for us to act. It's a very, very important issue. It's obviously a huge issue for people in Wyoming to make time to come down here and have a rally. This is a line that a lot of people will not cross. This is the Alamo for a lot of people, bodily autonomy. If you give if you cede your bodily autonomy and your medical decisions to the collective, and it's now the collective's right over your medical treatment, then we lose a lot of what we stand for in this country. Therefore, you're not entitled to your own property. You're not entitled to your own income anymore. If you can't make your own medical decisions, then what do we have in this country? What kind of freedom is left? So with the at-will state, again, we are an at-will state, but we also have civil rights laws. You are not free to violate people's civil rights. So you can't just fire somebody because they're Black, for instance. Fire somebody because they're a woman, their marital status, all that kind of stuff, religion. So at will has its limitations.
Thank you. Representative Gray, you want to come on up? You're welcome at the table to help answer questions. We're right in the middle of, he's kind of walked us through the bill.
Yeah, thank
and
you,
we're doing
Mr. Chairman.
questions, so
Apologize about what, is it okay if I talk for 1 second?
no, we're great. We're in great shape and we're just getting started. So,
Am I
Senator Scott?
still on for answering questions or asking?
Yes, you are. Follow up.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I guess the question was, does your ability to be employed by someone rise to the level of needing protection? Is that a right? Is it a right for you to have a job or work for a particular employer? I think that's kind of a rhetorical question. Senator Whiteman, you said that in your opening remarks that we didn't ask for this. The feds forced this on us. So I'm trying to understand, Does that mean that the only reason you're doing this is because of the federal mandate, the Biden rule? Is that what you're referring to? Explain that connection to me better than I got.
Mr. Chairman.
Either one of you can answer it well.
Yeah,
so
I'll
I'm
stumble
happy.
into it, and then Representative Gray
Thank you,
will.
Senator Byron. I
bring
just
it home.
clarifying, since Representative Gray knew he could just push his button and come in whenever
Right.
you feel like. Thank you.
Going back to your first argument about having a job as being a right, that's not what this bill deals with. This bill deals with vaccination status as being fired basically over your vaccination status regarding COVID-19 specifically. So that answers that question. What was the other question?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that answers the question for me, but I accept that that's your answer.
Okay. And the second question?
It's about, you mentioned that the feds have forced us into this. This bill is because the feds have forced us into this. So I'm not exactly seeing that. This is sort of creating our own opposite mandate in the state of Wyoming. I don't know that that is a reaction to what the feds have done. I'm trying to get your thinking as to why and exactly how the feds have forced us into needing this bill.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Case, Senator Case, I see it as when workers' fundamental rights of healthcare decisions as enshrined in our Constitution in the state of Wyoming are being violated, it's our duty to step up and act. And I would offer to you that the federal government has been the catalyst to this. Obviously, the federal government, this administration in particular, has made it a habit of subcontracting its dirty work, so to speak, to the private sector, whether it's big tech censorship or doing ins around the Constitution by allowing private businesses to do their bidding. I see that as this case. And so we have to come in and we have to provide this protection. And I'll yield to Representative Gray to elaborate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize about the lateness. My phone is not working today. And so when I got the text and phone call, the screen's not working, or it's like, anyway.
We're good. We'll take the excuse, dog, eat your homework.
Mr. Chairman, electronic dogs are special, much more efficient.
Mr. Chairman, the position of this bill is that this is a discriminatory practice. And just like in our statutes, we have decided in certain cases that, you know, we've involved ourselves in these situations. We're going to do the same thing on COVID-19 vaccination status, that this is a discriminatory practice. And the thinking on this bill is, rather than start with all the carve outs and continue to weaken it, that we start with the clear policy position that requiring COVID-19 vaccination is a discriminatory practice. And then as we work our way through the process, we build in the preemption issue and the carve outs. And I prefer working in this direction. I think it ends up with a better product rather than starting with all these carve outs, and then it just continues to sort of get carved out as it moves through the process. So I that's the thinking on this bill. The other thing that I think is important, and the position of this bill, which I'm not sure in 1001 in the House and Senate we're really dealing with, is what happens if a business feels pressured by the threat of a mandate or a mandate itself, a position I think we're in right now, and or what happens if a mandate comes into place, a nationwide stay is put into place, and then it's lifted at some point. And we're in this weird limbo period as we continue to make our way through the court process. And so the thinking is that we have this strong statement for us to fall back on. And that's the hope for this bill. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, if we could just be clear, you know, we kind of have different employers out there, and they don't just respond to what their needs are. Believe me, and a workforce in a business is your most important aspect. Like, I would never think of requiring my folks to be vaccinated, work for me. They would string me up. They would walk out the door and they would go somewhere else. We try to work at, there's a corporate policy that the franchise that we has that if you're not vaccinated, you wear a mask. My folks seem to be okay with that. And that's not my decision, that's the corporate. Our guests kind of expect protection and safety. They do. And we're nationally marketing on that. So you have some workforces, workplaces that have a culture. For example, we've heard from a fellow in Laramie. I think we could say it in committee. It's okay. His name is Mr. Glass. And he has a workforce and he's written this all. And he's explained that his workforce, they'd walk out the door if an unvaccinated person were to come in because they have a culture that they're protecting each other. They believe this, and so they want that protection for the rest of the people in the workforce. I can understand that actually. I'm kind of like, well, let the employers and the workers figure this out and have different plans out there. You could have my plan, which is if you're not vaccinated, you have to have a mask, which is really the corporate plan. You could have this gentleman's plan that if you're going to work for us, you're all going to be vaccinated and we're going to protect each other. You could have a different plan where the opposite is completely true. You're totally on your own. But right now, as I go around Wyoming, all I see is help wanted sites, now hiring. And so I think employers are very sensitive to what it takes to hire people. I'm not sure we need to get in this place. Of course, there's a problem with healthcare. But I certainly don't see it's a mass exodus, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a person that I'm the guardian for that's in a long-term care facility. Not all the employees there are vaccinated. I wish they were. If I had a choice to put him somewhere where everybody was vaccinated, I probably would if it were equivalent and possible. But that would be my choice. And it comes down to choice here, which is what I thought we all stood for at one time. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Case, I agree. But who in this case of COVID vaccination terminations that are happening, there is no choice for the employee that may have a religious, medical, or philosophical reason for not getting or natural immunity. They're just flat out getting fired. They're being told, get the shot or lose your job. No reasonable accommodations. No, hey, we'll move you over to this place over here where you're not going to be around certain people. Nothing. Just flat out take it or leave it. That's a problem. Obviously, you run your shop a lot different. You make accommodations for people. You understand your workforce and you wouldn't do that to people, but that doesn't mean that other people don't. And if everybody acted great, we wouldn't need to be making laws and we wouldn't be sitting here today. So, as Representative Gray mentioned, there, we started with basically the policy that we wanted, and we're going to carve out from there. Obviously, in other civil rights laws, there's bona fide occupational qualifications for different. And I'm getting the look from Senator Nethercott. It's been on since I've been in college, 2001. So maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is my understanding that there is a bona fide occupation qualification that you can discriminate under certain circumstances. In healthcare, for instance, if it's part of the job that you have to be vaccinated, that the courts would look at that and say, yes, that is a reasonable thing to do for healthcare workers. Senator Nethercott, you want to explain the look you just shot me because I might be off on the wrong tangent. I don't want to be talking about something that I may not know about. No. Okay.
Senator Case, Mr. Chairman, could I,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond to that really quick?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Responding to Senator Case's question. So, I'm watching this other bill, 1001. I'm on that committee. And we just received testimony from Banner Health that they're denying some religious exemptions. Now, explain that to me. How can you deny some religious exemption? It's something held between you and God. And we asked them, how is that possible? And they just said, well, we don't know. Well, my response to that is that what you're saying is playing out, that employers are being sensitive to the employment situation, is not happening for some reason. And I think it might be cultural. I think it is where we are at in 2021 with larger corporations deciding to go a certain direction and politically or for some reason that is not playing out, Senator Case. And as a libertarian leaning person myself, in terms of economics, I would like to think that is the way that would be play out, but it is not. And they appear to be going straight into a crisis where they're going to continue to have a shortage of healthcare workers. And that's mystifying to me, that they would, this is a voluntary mandate, keep in mind, this was done during the summer. And that's the other thing about this bill I wanted to mention, is that this is a statement for quote unquote voluntary mandates, or a corporation deciding to do it on their own, which is the Banner Health situation. And it is an intermediate step while we have this threat of a federal mandate coming into place to address that issue. And I don't think the Vehicle 1001 really does it. And that's part of the reason why I continue to bring this after the filing of 1001. So I want to be clear that this addresses a key permutation, a key box that we're dealing with right now. And I was really disappointed by the governor's letter because it, and the mainstream media's coverage of this, because they don't acknowledge this first box. And I don't want to get into someone's mind, but I wonder why, which is they don't acknowledge this box of companies that have done their own mandate, entities that have done their own mandate that haven't yet gone into effect, which is actually the number one reason why I think we're here at this moment. And the mainstream media doesn't want to acknowledge it. The governor's message didn't acknowledge it. It's very troubling to me because I think we need to address head on why we are here. And so that's the other thing we wanted to do with this bill. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, two things. There we got it. Swear I'm going to bring in a ranch hammer and deal with these microphones these days. Mr. Chairman, two things. In partial answer to the first question that Senator Case posed, I talked to quite a few people in my community. Some of them have some knowledge of what's going on at my local hospital. And I was informed last couple of weeks that the situation at our hospital was that approximately 3/4 of the staff had been vaccinated. Had been. That the remainder was divided, that some of them had already quit and then discovered that to work anywhere else they need to be vaccinated. But they had already quit. Some of them are waiting to see and will get vaccinated if we don't do something about the mandate. And the institution is scared that those people will simply catch the disease and then be quarantined and not available. And there's some that they just don't know what they'll do. Some of them will probably quit. It's a mixed bag, Mr. Chairman. But the 3/4 jumped out at me. Now, have been right at capacity. I was told we had patients in the hallway in gurneys waiting for a bed, and that we were putting some people with other diseases at considerable risk. I knew of at least one case of that. And that is a real problem. Mr. Chairman, the other question I've got is, as I read page 2, lines 15, this goes down to anybody that's employing just one individual. And so I'd like to ask the sponsors just a hypothetical question. Suppose an individual that has been vaccinated but is frail enough so that catching the COVID as a breakthrough infection, which we have seen. It's not as common as you might think, but it is, particularly with the Delta variant, it is occurring. Their doctor advises them they're not to get exposed. The doctors will do that. I had that advice given to me. Are you telling them with this bill, as I read this bill, and maybe no, I haven't seen it very long, so I may be getting it quite wrong. But it looks to me like this bill says the prospective employer who needs to hire somebody, come in the system with activities of daily living, with staying in, so they can stay in their own homes. They can receive medical treatment they need in their own home. If they go hire somebody, they can't find out and refuse anybody that hasn't been vaccinated. So you're forcing them to put themselves potentially at risk to catching a fatal illness. Is that what this bill is doing?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is an interesting hypothetical. I do not think so. I'm not sure they're an employee in that circumstance. And if I think that's an example of an exemption that could be built into this. But I'm not sure that that permutation is really an employee. I don't.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think it could be, you could be hiring an agency and telling them but you could also hire the person directly. And I think you see it in the real world. I think you see it done both ways.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting hypothetical. I think the first circumstance is an independent contractor. I don't think it applies to that one, but I could see where your hypothetical could happen. But I think that applies to almost every single one of these bills many of these bills that we're considering. So.
Mr. Chairman, to go to the first part of that question, I'm not sure if that was a question or a statement regarding the 75% versus 25%. That's good news that the 75% have been inoculated. The question I have is, why don't we ever talk about the 25% and what portion of that 25% is either already had the virus and has natural immunities? We just don't talk about it. And it's never brought up. I don't know why it's taboo to talk about natural immunity when it's better than getting the shot.
Sure, Scott.
You ought to know.
Mr. Chairman.
I should know. I damn near died from it. So.
I would like to make sure you understand that on that 75% figure that was given to me informally, I hope there's somebody in this room that has more current knowledge and more accurate knowledge. So that's what I heard. I'm reporting it to you, and the best information that I have. But I'm hoping there'll be somebody in the audience that has better knowledge, because it might be significantly more. I don't think it's less, but it might be. You know, if my informant was wrong, it would be.
Thank you for the questions. I've got a pile, unfortunately. This really is of kind of interest to me. And I'll just start and kind of work through it and ask kind of questions. I go back to the one person deal and tie it back to the $500,000 minimum fine. And let's talk a bit about that. So you can sue for not less than 500,000. That's the way the state's not less than 500,000. So when you go file a suit and you've proved your discrimination, which, by the way, we really don't have a very good definition of it. So I hire a number of people. And so someone takes me to court and says, Ogden and his wife told me that I have to have vaccination to go to work for them. And we deny it. Defending that case for a business my size put me out of business. I literally can't afford my own defense over a couple of people that got together and said we did it. And this potentially is an unbelievable lawsuit driver, in my opinion. of employees to come after employers and say, well, I'm looking there, she's smiling. And I guess to me, you can kind of answer it to me, but when I look at it, we go to page 3 and, or actually start on page 2, and it says, it's as simple as refuse employment to a person, bar a person from employment, discriminate against a person in compensation or in a term or privilege employment based on the current person's 19 vaccination status. That can be a cursory statement when you're visiting an interview is, you're visiting and it's, what do you think of it? You say, well, yeah, no, I don't like getting vaccinated. All of a sudden I find myself with a lawyer visiting me in a certified letter that says, hey, this guy actually read the bill. And he said, violated, it's misdemeanor. And I said, well, I'll pay the $750. That's fine. I can do that. But then the next section says, any person aggrieved by discriminatory practice prohibited section B, which is what I just read, can issue an action in court of competent jurisdiction to recover damages of not less than $500,000. Impunities damage as well as injunctive or other equitable relief from the employer. I'm going to tell you, as an employer, that scares the bejesus out of me. I guess it kind of helps me not to encourage anybody, but when you start getting into these size suits, this is enough money for somebody we got scams all over to come out and say, let's take on somebody. And by the way, if it's one of your big companies, they may settle for $300,000-400,000 rather than taking a chance on the punitive damage. I understand your teeth. I understand it well. But for your little mom and pop employers, this deal is really scary. And I'm just going to let you run on it and tell me why it should stay there and why it's there to start with. I don't know of anywhere else in our statutes that we allow minimum lawsuits to get filed and anything even close to this dollar.
Mr. Chairman. So it's amendable as we've heard on Bill 1001. I've always believed in amending things down rather than going the opposite direction. And I was talking about that. And that's the way I often present my bills. Whereas oftentimes we get the opposite direction in the legislature where it's the first thing is something that is more lukewarm and it just gets more and more lukewarm. And I think you leave it up to the committee in discussing these issues. So I like leaving placeholders. That's what we did in this bill. You can keep it in line with the discrimination statutes that already exist. And my answer to that is just don't discriminate, which is to employers. And as a small employer that I'm in myself, that's my answer. And we already have a whole section of statutes dealing with racial, all sorts of discrimination. So, and everything you said could apply to those situations as well, except the penalty, which is higher here, but that's just an amendment. And I certainly am not, I think it's up to the committee to decide that. And I like leaving large placeholders that allow the committee to have a vibrant discussion in terms of penalties. So that's the intent there. And I don't like clouding the discussion on that. But you can just fold it into the existing statute in discriminatory statutes, which already has a penalty mechanism in place. And
penalty or a civil lawsuit part that's in the existing.
It's a arbitration process. So, you could fold it into that. So yes, it is an arbitration process.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I got a question that's probably here. I haven't read the bill good enough. So now we've created this protected status. And when we go back to page 6, we talk about who it is that it deals with, except as provided on the immunity section. We talk about state, city, town, or county health officer, but we make no mention of federal. This bill has no mention of federal anywhere. So my question to you is, should we pass this bill and the feds come out with a mandate? This bill's now state law. It's there. Have we not created a catch-22 that automatically an employer's in a place that he's either going to get sued because he didn't follow state law, but federal law dictates that he do otherwise. Now he's in a place that he is really in a bind on a lawsuit because he's got to make a choice whether he violates federal or state law. And maybe I'm missing something in the bill, but I sure don't read it in there. From what my quick over, I read it the other night. But I don't see where that's at. I think we all know there's a reasonable chance federal mandates are coming. So we pass this, we put it in law. Now I automatically, as an employer, feds tell me I have to have one of my employees vaccinated. The state law tells me I can't ask them if they're vaccinated. Does this not do that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, so a couple answers to that question. One is I wanted the committee to have a vibrant discussion on the wording of and the preemption issue from 30,000 feet up rather than presupposing that issue. And I thought that would be a better way for the legislature to approach it in a special session where we have this extended period focusing on one issue. The other thing that I would say on that is I believe that I'm very worried about standing if a federal mandate does come. And in order to have a cause of action, I think we need to have a clear statement that a clear point of conflict. And this is a point of conflict because there would be conflict between state and federal statute. So part of this is to give the state better grounds to stand on, pardon the pun, because I have the scars of the standing issue from a couple other things, but to provide clear standing for the Attorney General, on behalf of the people of Wyoming, to say that we have standing in against the federal mandate, and to ensure that a federal court would say we do, and this statute puts that in place because there's a clear point of conflict. Otherwise, there's not.
How many of our
Or there may not be.
How many of our businesses get sued in the meantime while we're waiting on this? I guess me as an employer, the minute the feds come in,
Well,
the minute they come in, because I get them right now, the EPA sends you notice, it comes certified mail and it says you'll do it. And now we have a statute that's now law that says you won't do it. As an employer, I'm going to tell you, unless something seriously changes, I've got to vote no, because I can't be put in a place as an employer that you've made it where my own employees sue me over something they're in agreement with me on. They're aggrieved as well as I am. But I find myself in really a tough spot. And maybe I'm in the wrong place on this bill. I've been trying to find a hard way to support it, but it is terrifying to me to use me as a guinea pig to put me up on a preemption law so that you've got a basis to fight with the federal government, but you put my business on the line to do that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I don't interpret it that way. One of the things I talked about with Director Obrecht is that OSHA rules and regulations actually protected in federal law that there needs to be a 60-day period before any OSHA regulation goes into place. So it would be 60 days before anything would go into place. And the AG would now have a cause of action to begin that litigation. And so it would be adjudicated before that 60-day period. And
Another special session.
What's that?
Another special session.
No. Because there would be a cause of action and you'd have it make its way through the federal courts. And it's clear in OSHA.
That could take years. That could take years unless we got an injunction from a judge. And I don't know whether that would happen or not.
Mr. Chairman, that's become routine for federal courts to issue injunctions. And the other thing is they could issue an injunction on this statute very easily, or state court could even do that. I think that considering the 60-day protected period for OSHA mandates in federal statute, I think we'd be okay in that situation. But we could also build, language around that and make it clear that it's until all legal remedies are exhausted, like 1001.
I don't think the feds care if they're exhausted. Last line, but I am having a very hard time with it. It's I'm not going to be combative with you about it, but I think this is really, really scary to employers. I understand what you're trying to do. I think it does some admirable things, but as an employer, when I read this thing, it is flat scary, and there's no provision in there for backup. Now, you say 60-day on OSHA. What happens if the mandate comes through something different than OSHA? Because they've got a lot of different avenues other than OSHA, and I would bet they're looking at them right now, because part of them's there. I can tell you right now is, as an example, BLM and the feds are in the process, this will be news for everybody out there, but it's public, are about to invalidate our firefighting agreement with the federal government, because they're requiring every firefighter on a federal fire to be vaccinated. This is exactly what we're dealing with in this session. I can tell you my local firefighters where I live, they won't be on a federal fire. We got a lot of them aren't vaccinated, they won't go. Feds, if it's not happening, will do it. So they're looking at every avenue they can to come after us. We all understand that. What I don't want to do as a legislator is put us in a place that we've endangered either our employers or employees or citizens inadvertently by a bill that we passed that we don't have time to undo it. We found out in this special session, one, it's very hard to meet quickly. Second, our body's not very friendly towards quick actions that haven't had a lot of time to think about. And this is one of the ones, this bill I would love to visit over an interim on. But to sit here on a 1 day notice for me, or actually a little more, you sent me the bill ahead of time, still is not enough time to really have the true consequences ironed out. I'll give you free rein because I did it to you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I understand what you're saying, but I think many of the issues you raise could apply to the other discriminatory practices in statute. And so the position of this bill is that this is a discriminatory practice. You can build language around the issue if the federal government issues a mandate. And what I wanted to do was make a clear statement that this is a discriminatory practice, which I don't think 1001 quite gets at. And we can build the different gradations around it, but we've already done this in many places in statute. So I think the overall.
Have the feds or the state statute?
What's that?
Is Wyoming got a big section on discriminatory practices, or is it mainly?
Yes, yeah. This is built right into there.
Thank you. Would like to testify. We had a couple here have come and gone. Seeing none. Go to, I guess, any agency people is our standard procedure. I don't think we have any of those either. Anybody from the audience like to testify? Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, we do have one person online who'd like to testify as well.
Perfect. We'll get to them. Welcome. Yes, you both probably know it, standard procedure, name, whatever identifying you want to go with it, and take off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Josh Hannes. I'm with the Wyoming Hospital Association. I brought one of our members with us today.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Connell. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at North Bighorn Hospital in Lovell, Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a couple general comments, then I'll let Mr. Connell take over. With this bill specifically, and a number of the other bills, as hospitals, we have a few concerns. And so one of the things I'd like to say is that hospitals, whether they create mandates for any kind of vaccinations, COVID or flu shots or anything like that, these decisions to create safe environments are made thoughtfully. They're made with the best evidence available. They're made in consultation with physicians and staff members and leaders. And some of you on labor health have heard us talk about that we'd like to be able to maintain the ability to create those environments in the best ways that we know how. Like I said, patient safety, employee safety are number one considerations when making these moves. Now, one of the issues with this particular draft is that it creates criminal penalties for making these decisions. And Chairman Driscoll, I agree with a lot of the comments you made as an employer, and we share those and the position that it might put us in. Now, as it pertains to hospitals, we have this other issue as it relates to CMS. And so if there's a federal mandate that does come down, there's certainly going to be processes for exemptions and proving that your employees are vaccinated or not. And those might be conditions of participation for the Medicare program. So if we're in violation of the conditions of participation, one, we wouldn't be reimbursed for those patients that we see. We might not be able to admit more patients. So there becomes a concern about access to care in communities and where those patients will go. And then it also puts us at risk for not just the criminal penalties, but opens us up for civil litigation as well. So with those concerns in mind, I'll maybe let Mr. Connell talk about his experience on the ground, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. This is a unique day for me. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, lost his sight about 6 weeks after the landing on the shores of Normandy, lived on Thomes Avenue, and he walked to work many days. This is the first time I've stepped foot in this building where he was. So I feel him here today. I'm new to Wyoming, but I was born across the street at Cheyenne Regional Medical Center and was exiled to Montana for a number of years. And I've now returned and been back for a year. It's great to be in the state where these discussions are able to take place. I have a good friend who's the CEO of a hospital in Western Montana. Our neighbors to the north came out with a House Bill 702. You may be familiar with it. They took action on this a number of months ago, hoping to get the attention of the feds and preempt these vaccine mandates and the reactions that would come. So they were proactive about this. We're now finding that it hasn't been effective for my friend who's trying to manage the COVID pandemic, just like we are here in the state of Wyoming. It's not helping. It's not helping them get to immunity and helping them get to people getting back to their normal lives where they want to be. So that's just a point. North Bighorn Hospital is the largest employer in our county. We employ over 250 people. We are not excited about a vaccine mandate. It is scary. Also, it is scary to think about the ramifications of this bill and other bills that would ratchet up the tension between state and federal government over vaccine mandates. If you want to, as Chairman Driscoll, you mentioned the catch-22 for employers. That is 100% a reality that I face and that we will face in our community. So just to highlight what that would look like for me. So if we obey the federal government on these mandates and the state takes no action in this special session, we will be forced to make a decision on whether we would like to continue participating in Medicare's program. So the vaccine mandate is a condition of participation. In other words, if we would like to receive payments from CMS, then we would be required to follow those mandates. Again, we don't know what the exemptions look like, the medical exemption, the religious exemptions. We haven't seen the comment period. So I feel like this is a bit premature. But we would potentially choose to abide that, continue participating, require the vaccine mandate as a condition of employment, then we would get paid. If you're in North Bighorn Hospital District, more than 50% of our revenue in a given year, so we have a budget around $24 million, comes from federal payments. So just to put that into perspective, our salary expense a given year is about $12 million. So we don't really have a lot of option on this if it goes through. And then we lose good people. We lose our ability to care for patients. Nationally, 1% to 3% is what is being bandied about for those organizations that have gone through with these mandates. Those are also tend to be metropolitan areas, urban centers, very different politically than our state, certainly. So we may anticipate 10% of our workforce walks out the door, and that impacts our ability to care for patients. So that's if we obey the feds, that's what we get to look forward to. Okay. So the state passes this bill or others that restrict our ability to create safe environments and manage through this at the local level the best we can. we obey whatever comes down from the state. And we lose $12 million a year or more for a small rural hospital. And that means we can care for half the residents in our care center, half the patients. And we're one of 16 critical access hospitals funded this exact same way, out of the 28 hospitals in the state. So our neighbors, Powell, Three Rivers Health down in Basin, they all face a similar situation by obeying the state. And where do all those patients go? So I'm sensitive to the truth that there's a pandemic going on. And I'm also sensitive to the fact that this is being used for political purposes. We don't represent a corporate hospital. In Lovell, we have board members that feel strongly on both sides of this, staff that feel strongly on both sides of this. So if anything, I would urge the committee to show a little bit of patience and see how this plays out. We've been waiting on CMS to give the rules that are related to this mandate, and we were expecting those over 6 weeks ago. So maybe by having this meeting today and other states having those discussions, that's getting the attention that is needed without putting us in a very difficult situation where there's not any good solution. So thank you.
For the Hospital Association, Mr. Chairman, the question I got is how far off am I now on that 3/4 of them already are vaccinated?
Mr.
Does it
Chairman,
apply to Banner and does it apply to the other hospitals in the state?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott. So if you're referring to Banner, I think the number I heard this morning was closer to 80% is vaccinated. Yeah. Across the state, it varies. I think some are as low as, and don't quote me on this exact number, some are as low as between 40 and 50%. Others are closer to that 80% number and a bunch in the middle.
Further questions? We got one. Does CMS give a appeal period or a waiting period when they send you something down that they're going to take your funding away? Do they say you get 60 or 90 days to meet our deal, or how do they work time frames usually?
Mr. Chairman, so there is a public comment period on rules once they're published. So there'll be opportunity to respond to them. And then if there's if they come in and are doing an audit, you have an opportunity to come back into compliance. I think the number of days varies depending on the finding and how long you have to come into compliance, and then a tiered structure of, call it discipline, right? Or penalties for that. But ultimately, I mean, what can happen is if you're out of compliance with Medicare, you don't get that reimbursement and you're not allowed to admit patients. So, you know, what you might see, right, worst case scenario is patients would come into the emergency room where you'd have to triage and then send them somewhere else. Nursing homes would maybe be even a little more severe in the short term because they wouldn't be able to admit people into their facilities.
Good questions. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Thank you.
I believe we have one online.
Mr. Chairman, we have Brett Glass with his hand up. Would you like me to promote him?
Yes, please. What's his name again?
Brett Glass.
Okay. Yep. Welcome, Mr. Glass. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Chairman Driscoll. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've appeared before this committee before, but this may be the most important testimony I've ever rendered before the legislature or ever would render. I'm a Wyoming employer, and I have 2 Wyoming small businesses. Both of them are run out of my home. One is an internet provider, the other is a provider of rental housing. And the proponents of this bill are decrying a proposed federal mandate which does not apply to me and doesn't apply to most native Wyoming businesses as government overreach. But what are they doing? They're threatening to impose an overreaching mandate that does apply to us So even if you believe that the federal mandate is overreach, and many of us do not because we see it as a common sense safety measure, one overreaching mandate is not a solution to another. In what way would this fight government overreach? It wouldn't. It would be imposed on all small Wyoming businesses, but not on the large out-of-state businesses that would be exempted by the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And so we'd be, in order just to make a political gesture, we would be hurting all of the small businesses in our state, which again would be most of them. In my particular case, it would be a particular problem because it would require me to allow unvaccinated people to come in and invade the sanctity of my own home and infect my family, my employees, and my customers. And my employees, all of whom willingly got vaccinated, I gave them paid time off both to get their shots and to recover from any side effects if they needed them, have immunocompromised family members. They would literally walk out of the office, as Senator Case mentioned, if I allowed an unvaccinated one in, and that would basically shut us down. It would also mean that if I went and sought health care, I would have to risk being made sick or even killed by an irresponsible healthcare provider who was willingly not getting vaccinated and possibly carrying the disease. With some of these bills, depending on which one it is, I might not even be able to ask so that I could choose a provider who was vaccinated. Now, I and my employees, we welcome the vaccine, and I required that all employees be vaccinated because every day in the course of our work, we have to enter customers' homes. In our internet business, we have to do it in order to install the internet equipment, and in our rental property business, we need to do it to clean the apartments. We don't want to spread the disease from home to home and endanger the public, or bring it back to the office or into our homes or to our families. And so, well, if this bill passes, or anyone like it is passed and enacted into law, I can't afford as a small business to be the test case for it. Just as you said, Mr. Chairman, I certainly don't have the money to do that. I'd be forced to stop all hiring for fear of being accused of turning away someone who was an anti-vaxxer, and possibly, I could not possibly face ridiculous civil or even criminal penalties for protecting myself and my family and my staff. So what would I have to do? I'd have to hire the work out to a vaccinated independent contractor, possibly from out of state, or if I couldn't do that, I'd have to sell or fold my business. So please don't burden us with irresponsible and dangerous regulations just to make a political gesture. I mean, the vaccine is proven to be safe and effective. It's so good that it's recommended even for people who've had COVID, because research in Israel has shown that it protects against long-haul symptoms and reinfection. And my business is science-based. Anyone who denies science to such an extent that they're willing to endanger their life or other people's lives is already disqualified from working for us just on that basis. And likewise, no healthcare provider should employ someone who is willing to sicken or kill other people. Now, it was mentioned before, people talked before about a potential mass exodus as a result of these requirements. Well, the experience in other states has been that the actual attrition, when these requirements have gone into effect at an employer, has been at most a few percent. And so I really think that those claims are overblown, and we shouldn't be worried about them. I also think that religious liberty should not be an issue here for two reasons. First of all, our own Constitution, in Article 1, Section 18, says that even the right to religious liberty can't excuse acts that are inconsistent with safety. And this is exactly what we're dealing with here. We're talking about protecting our safety. What's more, the leaders of all major religions, including not only the Pope, but Christian Science, are exhorting their followers to get shots. There's no legitimate religious objection to this. So, well, in summary, I know you're going to be considering a number of bills, and so I'm just going to ask in general that you don't prohibit or criminalize employer vaccination requirements. Don't call it blackmail. Don't prohibit masking requirements or allow them to be waived just for the asking. Do incent state employees to get vaccinated. Do advocate the expansion of Medicaid because it would help to fund the our hospitals, which are right now overburdened by the COVID surge. Do provide unemployment benefits to people who quit because their employers fail to follow the federal regulations. And finally, if this politically motivated legislation does pass, please target it only at businesses that are affected by the federal mandates. Exempt any business to which the federal mandates do not apply from all of this, because we don't need to be caught in the crossfire, the political crossfire. And that's really all I have to say. I'll stand for questions if there are any, but thank you very much for your time.
Questions for Mr. Glass? Thank you very much. Nicely done. Do we have anyone else in the audience who'd like to testify? Please come forward. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a physician. I'm a pulmonary critical care physician. I'm on the front lines working the ICU. That's my day in, day out job. I feel that these mandates are not only violating our freedom to choose, but it's being based on false science. There are plenty of data out there saying that this does not prevent someone from getting the infection. There's been times where half of my patients in the ICU who are intubated and on full life support were vaccinated. So that's number one myth. Number two, one thing I would like to point out, the death rate for this disease in the US is 0.02%. 0.02. This is not as deadly a disease as something such as Ebola virus. That is not something that we are trying to fight against. We are trying to fight against something that has a low death rate. And unfortunately, in our media, it is being told and blown out of proportion that everyone who gets the disease dies. And that absolutely is not the case. 0.02%, and we are threatening people's rights to choice. I am a veteran, and I find that to be a slap in the face.
My name is Jo Lynn Hawthorne, and in my rush this morning, I didn't bring my white jacket, but I'm an OBGYN. I'm fairly new to Wyoming. I've lived here for 5 years. I absolutely love this state. I'm an OB hospitalist, so that means that I am in charge of labor and delivery during my shift. Just like Dina here is in charge of the ICU during her shift. I happen to work in 2 states. I work for 2 large healthcare systems. I work for Banner. I'm here at great risk to even show up and talk when they're going to review this. Okay, I just want you all to know that.
Very true.
And so here I am. I have been on the front line for a very long time, for the entire 18 months. I think I delivered one of the very first babies in Wyoming to a COVID positive person. At that moment, I dropped my fear of catching the disease and of dying from it, because we have all been terrified we were going to die from this thing. And when I knew somebody was like 38 weeks pregnant going to come in, I really got hysterical. And I called my husband, and my son called me. He's 26, and he said, "Mom, why are you so afraid?" And I said, "Well, I could die." And he looks at me, he says on the phone, "Are you really going to die?" And I said, "No." Ultimately, patient walks in, there was an emergency. I walked into the room, and I just did what I do. You know, you just walk in and you just do what you do. And I've done that for however many months. I think that baby was born in April of last year. Okay, mother did well, baby did well. Reached up afterwards and went and did what I always do, which is give the daddy a hug and congratulate him on his baby. And he almost stepped back because they were so afraid of being touched. We have forgotten something in this country. Through all of our fear and all the media coming down, I want to say we have a total myth about the fact that those that are vaccinated are safe. In Wyoming Medical Center, in the last month, we have had 4 physicians that I personally know about who have been COVID positive. Okay. Now, they're not going to be required to be tested to see if they're spreading the disease, but I'm going to be required to be tested. Apparently, they haven't told me what the things are that I'm going to be required to do, except wear a mask, which we're already obviously doing. And I'm very compliant with that. And if they require me to be tested, I think that's, I'm going to comply because that's what I don't want to give up my job. But I will tell you that at my other hospital in Florida, they didn't give one single religious exemption. It was terrifying. We have 12 nurses on that labor and delivery unit who are walking out. At Banner, we have 2 nurses who are depending upon you guys in the state legislature this week, where they're not going to be there on Monday. It's just that simple. Okay. These are seasoned nurses. I understand. Now, I don't have this. I wish that now that I'm here and talking, I wasn't going to talk. But now that I'm here, I'm wishing that I had the actual numbers. But I think I was told that we've hired 200 traveler nurses in Casper, Wyoming Medical Center. That's a little frightening. Mm-hmm. These are not seasoned nurses. They don't know our unit. It's not typical. They're out for the dollar because labor and delivery nurses are making $100 an hour, okay, to travel. And I bet at Wyoming Medical Center, they make about 42. So, we're not having our skilled labor who understand. Our nurses don't have another place to go. Actually, they do. They can, both of the nurses who are going to walk on Monday are going to go to WBI, all right, which is the Wyoming Behavioral Institute, because they both work there part-time already. We're a really small community. And I would just beg you to let people choose. Mm-hmm. Both of us sitting before you right now have read the science. The CDC says that if you are vaccinated, you can carry this disease as much as the unvaccinated. So the only person that's being protected, if I'm vaccinated, is me. That's the only person. That is proven in all the data that's out there. Now, that's not what the media is telling us. Yeah. But that's what the literature says. Okay, so I would just ask that I will be able to make my decision for myself. Mm-hmm. Because we have both witnessed serious vaccine injuries. We are not hearing this in the media because everyone is in lockstep. They are not going to talk about the vaccine injuries, and they are there. And if you happen to be the one that got the injury, if it was your baby that got the injury, you're 100%. And for a disease that really is not that deadly, mm-hmm. I don't want to take that risk. And I would beg you to take and stop. Is really discrimination. I went through medical school when AIDS was just starting. And let me tell you, you didn't dare ask any of these kind of questions. Mm-hmm. It was considered total discrimination if we asked about AIDS status. So why is it that suddenly people can just it becomes almost something you've got to wear on your arm? Okay, I've got my little vaccine. I'm vaxxed. I can go wherever. We need to think about what we're doing, and that I would just urge you. Thank you very much for listening.
One of my other concerns is we just don't have the safety data, despite what they are trying to sell in the media. We do not have long-term safety data. It has not been around that long. Even the influenza vaccine was developed for over 20 years before it was released to the public. We had long-term safety data, and that was released in 1940. Why are we pushing to rush this vaccine that we do not have that long-term safety data for on everybody within the country. And why are we violating those rights to choose your own medical care? I don't understand why this is even being debated, to be honest. I just cannot believe that we are in America. We're not in the America that I fought for. And adding on to what Dr. Hawthorne said, we have definitely had patients with vaccine injuries. I've taken care of patients personally who've had blood clots go to their lungs, and some have had strokes, massive strokes, and have died because of that. And it was from vaccine. I've taken care of patients who've developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, which if they hadn't gotten to the hospital would also be deadly. So it's not a benign disease process. It's not a benign vaccine. But the thing to keep in mind is the death rate is 0.02%, less than 1%. 99.98% of Americans do not die from this disease. And yet we're willing and debating whether to violate rights for freedom to choose.
Thank you. Questions? Ready? I have one.
Mhm.
Do you think if we pass this bill and a federal mandate comes down, you're actually going to have any protection?
Honestly, I think it will help give us some strength to stand on. I think we have to start somewhere, and somewhere's smaller.
Thank you. Questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to echo that. We have to, one of the things I love about Wyoming, I'm from Tennessee, okay, and was private practice there for many, many years. And I love the frontier, the resilience, the fact that spent a few months in Alaska, and it's supposed to be the frontier, but then I moved to Wyoming and wow, this is way more the frontier than Alaska ever thought about being. And yet I was so shocked that we weren't on the front of like coming out and saying, okay, no, you're not doing this to us just because you're not going to do it to us. Forget just like, I want to choose. I want to choose if I can carry a gun, which I choose not to, but I mean, that's my choice. And y'all wouldn't even consider it if this was coming down about guns. And yet this is almost a loaded gun. And so I would say we've got to start somewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
By the way, we very much appreciate what you do for a profession and all you've done for all of us. So, a big thank you. Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I hear the phrase follow the science bandied about frequently. My physician out at St. John's Medical Center in Jackson, internal medicine specialist, specifically recommended I not get a vaccine for a number of months. And his comment was, I don't like the numbers. I don't like the statistics. I don't like what I'm seeing. Finally, this August, he said, if you were 10 years younger, I'm 71, I'd be saying the same thing, but you've now crossed into that age bracket where it actually might make a difference in you personally surviving if you got infected. And they did a test on me, and to the best of my knowledge, I never had COVID. But at any rate, I just find his medical skills and analysis of stuff useful to you all. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Lancy. This is the first time I've had a chance to torment you in my committee.
Easy. Battery's not cooperating, so sorry, I gotta plug myself in here, but my name, Mr. Chairman, is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance, and the Business Alliance stands in opposition to Senate File 1004. Before I kind of walk into the analysis of why, I just kind of wanted to highlight some things that cause some grave concern for us as a business community. On page 3, line 7, where we make a criminal penalty for our business leaders to be subject to, very concerning. In addition to that, to have line 12 essentially encourage employees to sue their employer and not only set a floor of $500,000, but authorize punitive damages as well as other equitable relief from the employer is a death knell for small business in this state. These are not going to be claims that are going to be covered by insurance companies. This is going to be on our business owners' backs. And I can assure you that many of my members don't have $500-600 an hour to go hire a lawyer to defend themselves for 10 years of litigation on exercising their rights. We've heard a lot about rights tonight. The business owners, the private property, what about our private property rights, our right to contract? I think that we need to, as we heard, start somewhere. If we start somewhere, we're going to lose our OSHA primacy, and that's going to have a detrimental impact to the business community in the state. In addition to that, as we analyze what OSHA can do to us and how that plays out for every single business that's regulated by OSHA, which is pretty much our main economic drivers, our tourism industry, our agriculture industry, and our extraction industry, we need to carefully calculate those risks versus the rewards of essentially passing legislation that is going to be preempted under Article 7, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. So with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll just do a little rewind to 7th grade civics class, but I think this needs to be said. I think this does. Under the Supremacy Clause, Article 7 of the United States Constitution, federal law is the supreme law of the land. Whether we like it or not, that is our federalist system. I don't think any of us are happy with the situation that we find ourselves in today. But trying to legislate around it isn't the solution. The solution is at the ballot box, and it's through our third branch of government, the courts. So as a result, federal law can preempt or nullify state laws in a variety of circumstances. For example, state law may be preempted to the extent that it actually conflicts with federal law. Such a conflict occurs either because compliance is physically impossible, or because state law stands as an obstacle to the accomplishment of the full objectives of Congress. Preemption can also be based on regulations of the federal agency when acting within the agency's authority granted by Congress. There's been no discussion that OSHA is acting outside of their regulatory authority granted by Congress. And, right now, Wyoming is in a place where we have the privilege, not the right, to administer our own OSHA regulations. And I can assure you that my members would much rather deal with a friend and neighbor in Wyoming as their regulator as a Washington bureaucrat. And so, kind of how the standard works, and just kind of laying this out there, state legislation that forbids employers from obtaining information about vaccination status or requiring employees to be vaccinated will likely be preempted by a contrary standard adopted by federal OSHA, because the state law would actually conflict with the federal law. So when you have what this bill and others are attempting to do, a collision between state law and federal law, it will be the federal law that will prevail. Again, I'm not saying that I love that concept. I know you don't either, but it is what it is. The Supremacy Clause would also operate to limit Wyoming OSHA's options for complying with federal OSHA, meaning the act. Wyoming has jurisdiction over employee safety and health under a state plan approved by the federal OSHA since 1974. The test that we must adhere to, this is the litmus test in any action that the legislature would contemplate to not risk jeopardizing that OSHA primacy, is that Congress required that state plans create standards for employee health and safety that are, this is the buzzwords, at least as effective in providing safe and healthful employment as the federal standards. So that we can go beyond if we chose to, which I don't think any of us would want to. But the federal OSHA, like the federal regulations is what sets the floor, not the ceiling in Wyoming. So if the 10th Amendment also does not contradict or limits OSHA power to create or enforce workplace safety and requires states with state plans to do so also. The Supreme Court has held that if power is delegated to Congress in the Constitution, the state's amendment expressly disclaims any reservations to the power of that state. We all know that. When Congress created OSHA and the act, it did so through the exercise of constitutional powers to regulate interstate commerce, to provide for general welfare, the stated purposes, and to assure so far as possible that every working man and woman in the nation has working conditions to preserve human resources. No court has held that Congress exceeded its constitutional powers when it passed the act, and a 10th Amendment challenge to OSHA's authority to adopt a vaccine mandate would be unprecedented. So basically, I guess the point of my testimony here tonight is businesses need the opportunity to make their own decisions. No one wants to make decisions in the business community that I know that would be contrary to the health, safety, and welfare of their employees. But those are decisions that need to be made by employers, not the government. And so in light of knowing that we have, supremacy in our federalist system and employer and business property rights and that are grounded in a free market economy, this piece of legislation, unfortunately, just doesn't seem to reconcile with those principles. And for those reasons, I would ask that you vote no on this, and want to reemphasize the strong opposition from the business community.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question on the OSHA law. And Mr. Chairman, as written, this bill does not reach the OSHA regulation as hasn't been promulgated yet. This strictly speaks to businesses in Wyoming, whether they are covered by the federal OSHA or not, or covered by any prospective regulation or not. So we have to look at it from that perspective, but it does lead to the potential of a clash with OSHA. I can see that OSHA as a regulation of interstate commerce could constitutionally preempt us in this area. They have in some other safety areas, they mandate hard hats, they mandate steel-toed boots. There's a bunch of things they mandate. What I don't know, I've assumed from that the OSHA law gives them adequate authority to enact a vaccination, COVID vaccination mandate. My question is, have you looked, or have any of your people looked at the existing OSHA law to see if it does in fact provide an adequate basis in law to create regulations that would mandate a COVID vaccine?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, what I think the question is does in federal law create that? If that is the question, Senator Scott, we've seen it in other areas of the law as far as flu vaccines. Like, this has already sort of been an established precedent that has been litigated. So the challenge that I think we're all facing right now is without the understanding of really what is coming down the pike as far as a mandate on vaccination. We know some material pieces, but not the full rule. Obviously, that will take time to go through the rulemaking process, but knowing the pieces that are at play, any kind of clash with that federal regulation could risk Wyoming's ability to carry out and administer its own OSHA state plan.
Scott, follow up. So you're telling me that you do think the existing OSHA law has a good basis in law for a regulation that would impose a COVID vaccination mandate. Is that a correct understanding of your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, my testimony is that this is vaccination mandates in certain aspects of the law has already been tested by the courts. I think COVID is very new to all of us. We're trying to keep COVID out of the courts as this body helped the business community last time we were together and providing some limits on liability to disincentivize litigation as opposed to promote it. But without knowing the full scope of what we're dealing with, a mandate to respond to a mandate is certainly not what the business community thinks is the answer, is what my testimony is.
Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate
Chairman and
you
members of the
you
committee.
Represent. Thank you. Further testimony
I might have one, Mr. Chairman.
in your case.
Well, it just seems that if OSHA were in play and the federal government were looking for a state where they could easily take over OSHA, wouldn't it be fair to think that Wyoming might be the easiest state? Because really, what would it take? We have a limited number of businesses that would fit that. So maybe a couple of inspectors could come and begin, and it would be that simple.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to Senator Case's question, that is a concern, and this is real. And on October 19th, 2021, OSHA notified the state of Utah, Arizona, and South Carolina that it was initiating reconsideration proceedings to revoke those states' plans because those states did not adopt standards to enforce OSHA's healthcare emergency temporary standard the agency issued on June 10th of 2021. So to your point, Senator Case, this is happening to our neighbors. It's very likely through, a reasonable assumption that it could happen to us as well. Thank you.
Further testimony. Do we have anyone else online? Senator Bateman, keep it brief. We want to go home and eat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to address a couple of points that were made throughout the testimony. Specifically, the Supremacy Clause. I'm not aware of an executive order being a law passed by Congress. I think the Supremacy Clause deals with laws passed by the Congress being the supreme law of the land, not executive fiat. That's point number one. My question would be, what constitutional or statutory authority does the President of the United States have to issue an executive order mandating that citizens of this country get vaccinated? I would ask you all that question.
Scott?
The executive branch does not write laws. Congress writes laws. And will employers assume liability for adverse reactions to this vaccine if they are so eager to force their employees to get this vaccine? Are they going to voluntarily assume liability? I guarantee you the answer is no. So they're protected from liability. They're protected from everything. The people that lose at the end of the day are employees in the state of Wyoming. And that's what we have to grapple with this week. We have to thread that needle where we're not unduly punishing employers, but we also have to not forget about the people that this will affect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for your consideration.
Mr. Scott?
Mr. Chairman, U.S. Constitution, Article 6. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound by thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Mr. Chairman, that's why I was asking Mrs. Delancey as to the underlying OSHA law. If that law is a firm basis, and apparently there's some precedence that it is, for a vaccine mandate, then that law would fall under this Supremacy Clause. And Mr. Chairman, so would a regulation that enforces that law. So But I think we've got to understand that with this bill, that's a hypothetical situation that the bill may get us into. The real question, Mr. Chairman, what's it going to do with our existing employers, including the ones that are not subject to the respective interstate commerce-based OSHA regulations?
And I appreciate that. We're going to end up with a conflict of law regardless. Whether it's OSHA, if you do take that track and say OSHA does have the authority based on Congress giving them that authority, it butts up against, if we were to pass something like this to protect our employees in a labor law, civil rights type of case, you're going to have it's going to have to be tested in the courts to see whose rights prevail. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a conflict of rights. The right of somebody to make that personal choice of whether or not they want to get what I consider as experimental vaccine or not, and not even be allowed to sue for any damages that this vaccine causes. The employers are immune. The government's immune. You're putting people in untenable situations. So we're going to have this conflict in the law regardless. We're just trying to provide an avenue to protect Wyoming employees. We also are cognizant of the fact that the employers have to be protected in Wyoming too. We've got to balance this out. We got to get to work and we got to come up with a good solution.
I'll make a quick one on what you just said. You're putting employers in between on the lawsuit, putting them in the middle. They're the ones that take it. They still have recourse. Anybody that's affected by the vaccine. So I'll take your other arguments at face value. But anyone affected by the vaccine has the full weight and power of our entire judicial system to go after vaccine companies, anybody that administers it. And you're transferring part of that liability onto an employer now, an employer that's been told that they have to do it. And that's a difference. That's a big, big difference. You have every right in the world, if you've got any kind of bad care given to you, to sue who gave you that care and who caused it. So the companies that manufacture the vaccine, the doctors that administer them sitting in the back of the room, they all can get sued. But now you've interjected where an employer gets in the middle of this. And
Mr. Chairman, I would argue that you cannot sue the manufacturer of these COVID vaccines. They are shielded from liability. So that doesn't apply here. And that's the problem. These people have no recourse. And you talk about the
two rights
employers.
makes a wrong, and we're going to go after an employer now.
We got to do something. Doing nothing's not going to solve the problem. We just bow down to the federal government, let them take this power that they don't have. We're just going to roll over and take it. We got to do something. This is one vehicle. Let's work it.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? Thank you. Oh, I'm loath to go through this. We aren't going to go back into a back and forth, Ms. Delancey, sorry. Public testimony is closed. We're back to the committee. Committee, what's your pleasure? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, just in generalities first, I don't think there's support for this bill in the committee. I might be wrong, but I would be willing to make a positive motion and then vote no against the bill itself. So if that's cleaner, that we could report it out with a no. And I think it's cleaner. I think it's more definitive, but it's up to the committee.
Let's accept.
Okay. If it's okay, then I will make a motion to pass the bill.
Moved, and we haven't been doing seconds in this committee, so we're good with that. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boner.
Yeah, I think we did have a good discussion. These are some of the nuances we're gonna have to figure out. So even though I think I know where the bill's going, and so if it's okay, I'd like to vote for at least one amendment. And if that's okay, I'd say on page 2, line 16, strike the words 1 and insert 25. So this is in the definition of what an employer is. Right now, the bill says everybody who has one employee is going to be, having to make these tough decisions. And I'm just saying that, as I asked, at least the Senate sponsor this bill, have we heard any challenges, any issues with a local or small business requiring a vaccine? And I think we've heard some testimony that stuff has a way of working itself out. the challenges we see and the challenge and why we're here is because these large corporations, which are disassociated with the people whose livelihoods are affecting, have been working that for them. That's the issue. I think that this bill could be tightened up a little bit when we, I'm not an attorney, but I don't want to give every last, employer necessarily a chance to have cause for the lawsuits that we know are coming based off this legislation. So, so that's the motion to make that amendment. I just think it's important that we distinguish between small businesses and these larger corporations. And as we move forward with these discussions in general, that it gives us an opportunity to maybe have a little bit of humility as legislators, understanding we're not going to be able to anticipate every last situation. And we don't want to, we want to hit what we're aiming at and nothing more. And so that's the reason for the amendment. I think it's important for discussion.
Mr. Chairman. I think that is a good amendment. I would like to encourage maybe a friendly amendment to raise that number higher. Because lots of employers have 25 people. And that's sort of a competitive market. An employee, I would bet that overall, it's not quite as specialized. Like this company we're talking about probably has maybe 1,000 people. I don't know, the one that's been used as an example. Well, you don't have quite as many alternatives in that point, but there are lots of employers that have 25 people. Certainly I fall in that category. Last year, I had about 28 people go in one day when we got the COVID restrictions. So maybe 100 or something like that. Is that friendly?
It's friendly, but just barely, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So I'll have a comment back to the 100. I think 100 is an absolutely perfect number if you're going to amend it, because that's where the federal mandate kicked in at. It was 100. So that aligns us where, at least if we're going to do it, it puts us in line with what the federal mandate said was employers of 100 or fell under this rule. So comment. Senator, another cut. So where would you like it to be at, Senator Boner? Good. Other discussion? Just called on favor of 100 for the amendment. I think we all understand what it is.
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. It's passed. Back on the bill. Any further amendments? Question on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on Senate File 1004 as amended. Senator Boner? Senator Case?
No.
Senator Nethercott? Senator Scott? Chairman Driscoll?
No.
Mr. Chairman, that's 4 noes and 1 aye.
Thank you. Senate File 1004 has failed the Senate committee. Next up, we will do Senate File 1019. Senator Ellis, I made you pay a steep penalty for not being in the room when we started. I'm sorry. That's my apologies. And for all the rest of you. We don't operate as quickly as we should sometimes.
Thank you, Senator Driscoll. And no worries, I didn't hear the time right. So my apologies for not being here promptly. Before you have Senate File 1019, you heard the description on the floor. For your reference, I decided to provide you a copy of House Bill 171. And so just if you wanted to flip through House Bill 171, you'll see on page 1, 2, 3, 4, and then half of page 5. Those parts of what was in the bill as section 1 were incorporated into Senate File 56. But then you'll see sections 2, which is what the legislature passed and amended in 171 that was inadvertently repealed. And so what this scrivener's error would seek to correct are those, the over repeal of these critical provisions. So if you start looking on page 5, you'll see that, and this is going on to page 6, excuse me, the definition of a peace officer was added in subparagraph R. And it said any person qualified pursuant to Wyoming statute 9-1-701 through 707 and employed by the Wyoming Gaming Commission when engaged in performance of that person's duties or when responding to a request to assist other peace officers acting within the scope of their official duties in their jurisdiction. So this is what allowed the Wyoming Gaming Commission to hire and utilize law enforcement. But because we over repealed this part of it, there's been a lot of discussion about the impacts that that's had for law enforcement on two fronts. First is their retirement benefits, and second is their ability to do their job entirely. So while there are some other errors that you'll see were impacted, the number of commissioners, their voting duties, whether or not there are liaisons, what have you, are certainly of much less significance and could be addressed in a future at a future point in time. But this piece about the law enforcement is a bit of a problem. And so since we are here meeting as a legislature, I thought it would be good to bring this bill. A few of my colleagues have asked, well, this is not COVID related. And I just remind folks that I am not in leadership and I didn't call the special session saying that I was going to limit a session to only COVID related bills. So I think this is important and that's why I'm bringing it to your attention. And looking at Senate File 1019, you'll see that it's a narrowly crafted bill titled Wyoming Gaming Commission Scrivener's Error Correction. And there are some findings, and this will be important. I know we don't normally do findings, but we want to be clear and at least have in some referenced area what our intent was in passing this legislation. Section 2, you'll see that the bill will be amended to say that in the repealer that we did in Senate File 56, that we only intended to repeal Section 1 and that the rest remains intact. So the reason we're bringing this to you, so you're aware, committee members, is we, as a Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee, we met yesterday. We discussed the Scrivener's error. It did have unanimous support in our committee. Our goal is for it to move quickly and not be used as a vehicle for any substantive policy changes in the gaming world. And again, the reason we're bringing it to you in the special session is because we do see it as being an urgent issue in order to protect our law enforcement personnel that work with the commission. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Chairman Ellis, Senator Scott.
And I'm confused. So if, yeah, it's on. If we pass this, then Section 1 is repealed. And I don't see anything about peace officers in Section 1. It's we're getting rid of a provision that the amusement game shall allow a game play of not more than $3, that sort of thing. And that's the intent, is to get rid of those. And I don't see the law enforcement implication. Maybe I'm missing something totally here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott, let me back up and just explain a little bit better. So you'll recall that in 2020, the legislature passed House Bill 171, and I provided you a copy of that bill. So that's what's in front of you. This converted the Wyoming Gaming, or excuse me, the Parimutuel Commission into the Wyoming Gaming Commission. And it gave them the regulatory authority to authorize skill-based amusement games in the state of Wyoming. And at the time, we were unaware of how many machines were in the state, who the operators were, where these machines were located. And so in an effort to get our arms around some of that data, the Gaming Commission was created through session law. And it was only intended to allow for a 1-year period to kind of collect that information. And so those games would be authorized to operate in Wyoming for a period of about a year. And then after that, there was a sunset included in House Bill 171. As we started collecting that information and understanding who the operators were, who the establishment owners were, all of that information, we did get a request from industry wanting to make the Gaming Commission permanent and also allowing for permanent authorization for these games to exist in the state of Wyoming. And so Senate File 56 codified Section 1 of House Bill 171. All of the provisions that you'll see on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and half of page 5 were contained in Senate File 56, which we passed this last session. Those provisions were subject to some additional amendments, but by and large, those concepts are codified now in the Green Books. So in working on Senate File 56, we intended to repeal Section 1 because we are already codifying that language. But the repealer, instead of only repealing Section 1, repealed everything. So that's where you'll see Section 2 beginning on page 5 and then moving on to page 6. That's where you'll see the definition of peace officer and law enforcement. And that's been probably, I guess, my opinion, the most significant part of the error. And it really was a drafting error. And, certainly this is not something I'm excited of of a piece of legislation I worked on that contained an error. I know LSO feels badly, the executive branch. This is an error and it happens.
Mr. Chairman, so this, Mr. Chairman, so this Enrolled Act 95 is in fact Chapter 114, Section 1.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one more comment. One of the other provisions that would be important for Senator Case's knowledge is the House Bill 171 added 2 positions to the Wyoming Gaming Commission, a law enforcement rep, as well as someone from one of the tribes, a tribal member rep. And because of the scrivener's error, those 2 members are now no longer technically members of the commission. The governor has invited them to participate as advisors on that commission, but they no longer have voting rights. And so we've got a number of issues I think that the Gaming Commission anticipates on its horizon. I think the intent was to allow that tribal rep to have a vote. And so again, we're just trying to clean up this error and allow those people to have the vote that they were intended to have.
Further questions? Thank you. Anybody in the audience like to testify? Thank you. Anyone online? No one online. Public testimony is closed. Bill has been moved. Question called. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on Senate File 1019. Senator Boner, Senator Case, Senator Nethercott, Senator Scott, Chairman Driscoll. Those are 5 ayes, Mr. Chairman.
Any further business in front of the committee? Anyone? Good day.
It's been a
Thank all
long
of you.
session, boy.
Thank you. We're adjourned. See everybody.